I found the photograph at an estate auction in Brussels, Belgium. It was a Thursday in November, one of those grey autumn days when the rain never quite stops, and the old cobblestone streets glisten under the streetlights. The auction house was clearing out the contents of a convent that had closed after operating for over a century. And among the lots were dozens of old photographs documenting the institution's history. Most bidders were interested in the religious artifacts: chalices, candlesticks, statues of saints. But I was drawn to a large photograph, perhaps 12 by 16 inches, showing a group of nuns and children posed outdoors in front of a wall covered with thick ivy. The photograph showed 3 nuns and 16 children. The children, 13 girls and 3 boys, were arranged in 2 rows, the younger ones in front and the older children standing behind them. All wore matching patterned dresses with high collars and ruffled shoulders, their expressions serious and subdued, reflecting the somber discipline of orphanage life in 1905. The 3 nuns, dressed in dark habits and veils, stood behind the children, their presence formal and watchful. But it was the nun on the far right who immediately caught my attention. Her face was partially shadowed beneath her heavy veil, eyes fixed intently on the camera, giving her a quiet but eerie and haunting presence that subtly dominated the otherwise orderly scene. There was something wrong about her gaze, something predatory. The auction catalogue noted, photograph from St. Catherine's Orphanage, Brussels, circa 1905. Institution closed 1907 under controversial circumstances. Historical interest. On the back of the photograph, in faded French, was written, Les Orphelines de Sainte Catherine, Bruxelles, Belgique, Septembre, 1905. And below that, in different, more recent handwriting in English, The Night of the Vanishing. Sister Margaret, far right, 13 children, murdered May. Their souls rest in peace. I bought the photograph along with a box of related materials for €800, my hands trembling slightly as I carried them to my car. That evening in my hotel room, I spread everything out. The box contained orphanage records, newspaper clippings, police reports, psychiatric evaluations, and testimony from survivors. Together, they told one of the most horrific stories I'd encountered in my years of researching historical photographs. St. Beit, Catherine's Orphanage, had been established in 1878 to provide care and Christian education to orphaned and abandoned children of Brussels. By 1905, it housed approximately 60 children aged 4 to 16, supervised by 8 nuns from the Sisters of Mercy order. From the orphanage records, I learned that Sister Margaret Vandenberg had joined the order in 1895 at age 24. She had specifically requested assignment to St. Catherine's Orphanage, expressing what her superiors described as an unusual but admirable dedication to working with children. That dedication, I would learn, was actually an obsession, and the orphanage was her hunting ground. The newspaper clippings told the story of what happened in October 1905. From Le Soir, October 17th, La Mens-Enfant, horreur à l'orphelinat, Sainte Catherine. 13 enfants disparus, horror at St. Catherine's Orphanage. 13 children vanished. Authorities are investigating the disappearance of 13 children from St. Catherine's Orphanage, who vanished from their dormitory during the night of October 15th, 16. The missing children, 10 girls and 3 boys, aged 6 to 14, were discovered absent during morning roll call on October 16th. Despite extensive searches of the orphanage building and grounds, no trace of them has been found. Most disturbing, the dormitory where the children slept was locked from the inside. Sister Margaret, who was responsible for night supervision of that dormitory, claims she heard nothing unusual, but cannot explain the disappearances. Authorities have taken Sister Margaret into custody for questioning. From Le Soir, Octobre 19, 1905. Découverte macabre. Les corps retrouvés dans la cave. Macabre discovery bodies found in cellar. The bodies of the 13 missing children from St. Catherine's Orphanage have been discovered in a sealed cellar beneath the orphanage chapel. The cellar, unknown to most of the orphanage staff, was accessible through a hidden entrance in Sister Margaret's private quarters. Police found the bodies arranged in a circular pattern, all showing signs of strangulation. Sister Margaret has confessed to the murders. According to her statement, she killed all 13 children during the night of October 15th, using chloroform to render them unconscious before strangling them one by one. She claims she was saving their souls by sending them to heaven before they could be corrupted by the world. The community is in shock. I found the detailed police investigation files, which painted a picture of methodical, calculated murder. From the police report, October 1905. Investigation into the deaths of 13 children at St. Catherine's Orphanage. On the night of October 15-16, 1905, Sister Margaret Vandenberg murdered 13 children in her care. The victims were Marie Dubois, 6, Sophie Laurent, 7, Emma Petit, 8, Isabelle Martin, 9, Claire Bernard, 10, Louise Thomas, 11, Marguerite Robert, 12, Antoinette Moreau, 13, Julie Simon, 13, Catherine Dubois, 14, and 3 boys, Jean Mercier, 8, Henri Blanc, 10, and Thomas Lefebvre, 12. The North Dormitory housed 20 children total. 7 survived because they were not selected by Sister Margaret. According to statements from surviving children, Sister Margaret entered the dormitory at approximately midnight on October 15th. Using chloroform-soaked cloths, she rendered her selected victims unconscious. She then strangled each child while they were unconscious, a process that took approximately 2.5 hours. The 7 children who were not selected pretended to sleep throughout this ordeal, paralyzed by fear, as they watched Sister Margaret systematically murder their friends and dormitory mates. After completing the murders, Sister Margaret moved all 13 bodies to a hidden cellar she had discovered years earlier and had prepared for this purpose. She arranged the bodies in a circular pattern with their hands folded in prayer. She then returned to the dormitory, acted normally the following morning, and even helped search for the missing children. Sister Margaret's background and motive. Investigation into Sister Margaret's background reveals a disturbing pattern. Before joining the Sisters of Mercy in 1895, she worked at 2 other institutions caring for children: Notre Dame Children's Home, Ghent, 1892-1893. 2 children died under suspicious circumstances while in her care. Deaths attributed to illness at the time. St. Joseph's Orphanage, Antwerp, 1893-1895. 3 children died mysteriously. 1 death ruled accidental, 2 attributed to sudden illness. We now believe all 5 of these deaths were murders committed by Sister Margaret. She was never suspected because deaths of orphans and institutionalized children were not uncommon and were rarely investigated thoroughly. In her confession, Sister Margaret stated that she had been planning the mass murder at St. Catherine's for over a year. She carefully selected her victims, children she perceived as particularly pure, and therefore in need of early salvation, before worldly corruption could damn their souls. She chose the night of October 15th deliberately, as it held religious significance in her delusional belief system. She had acquired chloroform gradually over several months and had prepared the hidden cellar as a space to arrange the bodies. Most disturbing, Sister Margaret admits to specifically choosing to become a nun working with orphans because, in her words, orphans have no one to protect them, no one to question their deaths, and no one who will miss them if they are taken to heaven early. They are perfect candidates for salvation through mercy killing. She is a predator who used religious vocation as a means of accessing victims. She specifically targeted the most vulnerable children in society, those without families, without advocates, without anyone to protect them or investigate their deaths. I found testimony from the surviving children who had witnessed the murders. Reading it was devastating. From the testimony of Jeanne Moreau, age 12, October 1905. I shared the North Dormitory with 19 other children. I was awake on the night of October 15th, when Sister Margaret entered our room. It was past midnight. She was carrying a cloth bag and a lamp turned very low. This was unusual. The nuns didn't normally enter the dormitories at night unless someone was sick. I lay perfectly still and watched through half-closed eyes. Sister Margaret went to Marie Dubois' bed first. Marie was only 6 years old. Sister Margaret put a cloth over Marie's face. Marie struggled for a moment, then went limp. Then Sister Margaret put her hands around Marie's neck and squeezed. I could hear Marie making small sounds, even though she was unconscious. After a few minutes, Marie stopped moving entirely. I wanted to scream, to run for help, but I was frozen with terror. I was certain that if I moved, if Sister Margaret knew I was awake, she would kill me too. Sister Margaret moved to the next bed, then the next. She was choosing specific children. Children she had been paying special attention to for weeks. Children she had called blessed or chosen or particularly pure. She moved through the dormitory like death itself, calm and methodical. She strangled 13 of my friends while I lay paralyzed by fear, pretending to sleep. The other children who survived, we've spoken about it since. We all did the same thing. We all lay perfectly still and pretended to be asleep. We all watched as she murdered our friends, and we all live with the guilt of having done nothing. After Sister Margareta killed all 13 children, she left the dormitory. We heard her making multiple trips. She was moving the bodies. We learned later she was taking them to the cellar beneath the chapel. When she finally left and locked the door, the 7 of us who survived huddled together in the dark, too frightened to cry, too terrified to speak, just waiting for morning and praying she wouldn't come back for us. When morning came and the other nuns discovered the children were missing, Sister Margaret acted concerned and helpful. She prayed with us. She helped search. She showed no sign whatsoever that she had murdered 13 children just hours before. I will never forget her face that night. There was no anger, no emotion at all. She killed those children as calmly as if she were performing daily chores, as if strangling children was simply another duty. And I will never forget her eyes. In that dim lamplight they looked dead, empty, like looking into the eyes of something that only wore a human face. From the testimony of Mother Superior Agnes, October 1905, Sister Margaret joined our order in 1895. She was 24 years old, from a respectable Brussels family, seemingly devout and passionately dedicated to serving God through caring for orphaned children. I confess I had concerns about her from the beginning. There was something cold about her piety. It lacked warmth, lacked compassion. Her dedication to the children seemed intense, but somehow wrong, though I could not articulate exactly why. She spoke often and obsessively about sin, about corruption, about how innocent children could be saved from future damnation. At the time, I thought this was simply excessive zeal. I now understand it was the rationalization of a murderer. In the months before October 15th, Sister Margaret became increasingly focused on certain children, the 13 who would become her victims. She spoke of them as having special souls that needed particular protection. I thought she was taking extra pastoral interest in their spiritual development. I did not realize she was selecting them for murder. Sister Margaret had volunteered to supervise the North Dormitory the night of October 15th. This was not unusual. The nuns rotated night supervision duties. I went to bed that night not knowing that one of my sisters in Christ was at that very moment systematically murdering 13 children in our care. When I learned what she had done, I was physically ill for days. I cannot comprehend how anyone could do such things, how someone could strangle 13 sleeping children and claim to be doing God's work. We failed those children. We allowed a monster to wear a nun's habit and use it as a disguise to access victims. Sister Margaret's confession makes clear that she specifically became a nun to gain access to vulnerable children she could murder without suspicion. She chose to work with orphans because orphans are invisible to society. They die, and few people notice or care. She exploited their vulnerability in the most evil way imaginable. I found psychiatric evaluations of Sister Margaret conducted after her arrest. From the evaluation by Dr. Henri Dubois, November 1905. I have examined Sister Margaret Vandenberg extensively. She presents as calm, rational, and utterly convinced of the righteousness of her actions. She shows no remorse whatsoever for murdering 13 children. Instead, she expresses satisfaction at having saved their souls, and states that the children should be grateful for being sent to heaven before they could sin. Sister Margaret's delusional belief system developed gradually over many years. She came to believe that she had been chosen by God to identify particularly pure children and save them through mercy killing, sending them to heaven while they were still innocent, rather than allowing them to grow up and potentially commit sins that would damn them. She selected her 13 victims carefully over several months. She chose children she perceived as especially innocent and vulnerable, children who, in her twisted reasoning, were most at risk of future corruption. She planned the murders meticulously. She discovered the hidden cellar years ago and prepared it specifically as a space to arrange the bodies. She acquired chloroform gradually. She waited for the right moment when she would be supervising the targeted children's dormitory. Most disturbing is her complete lack of understanding that she has committed evil. She genuinely believes she performed acts of mercy. She sees herself as a savior, not a murderer. However, Sister Margaret is not legally insane in the sense of being unable to understand her actions. She knew exactly what she was doing. She planned carefully. She understood that society would condemn her actions, which is why she hid the bodies and attempted to conceal her crimes. She is both delusional and criminally culpable. Most chilling is what she revealed about her previous murders. She admits to killing 5 children at previous institutions, deaths that were never investigated as murders. She describes these killings as practice and learning experiences that prepared her for her great work at St. Catherine's. She specifically chose to become a nun working with orphans because it gave her access to the most vulnerable children in society, children whose deaths would not be thoroughly investigated, children whom society would not miss. Sister Margareta is a predator who used religious vocation as camouflage. She is intelligent, calculating, and extremely dangerous. She should never be released. The trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming, the confession detailed, the psychiatric evaluation damning. From Le Soir, December 15th, 1905. Sister Margaret condamnée à perpétuité. Sister Margaret sentenced to life imprisonment. Sister Margaret van den Burg has been sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of 13 children at St. Catherine's Orphanage. In sentencing, Judge François Moreau stated, "You are a wolf who wore shepherd's clothing. You used your position of trust and religious authority to murder innocent children who had already suffered the loss of their families. You claim to have been doing God's work, but you are doing the devil's work. You are evil incarnate, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison." Sister Margaret showed no emotion upon hearing the sentence. She stated only, "God knows I did right. The children are in heaven because of me. History will vindicate my mercy." St. Catherine's Orphanage will close permanently. The surviving children are being transferred to other institutions. The building will be deconsecrated and eventually demolished. I found records showing that Sister Margaret had lived in prison until 1934, dying at age 63 from pneumonia. Prison records indicated she never showed remorse and spent her final 29 years maintaining she had been a savior of children's souls. But it was one more document that completed the picture. A letter written in 1952 by one of the surviving witnesses, now an adult woman with children of her own. From a letter by Jeanne Moreau, née Moreau, now Jeanne Durand, dated 1952. "I am 60 years old now. I have children and grandchildren. I have lived a full life. But I have never escaped that night in October 1905, when I watched Sister Margaret murder 13 of my friends, while I lay paralyzed by fear, pretending to be asleep. People ask me why the 7 of us who survived didn't do anything, didn't scream for help, didn't run, didn't try to stop her. They don't understand what it was like. We were children. We were orphans who had already lost everything. We had been taught all our lives to obey the nuns without question, to never speak back, to accept punishment silently. And we were terrified. Sister Margaret was killing children, strangling them in their beds. We were certain that if she knew we were awake, we would be next. So we lay still. We watched. We did nothing. And we have carried that guilt for 47 years. I think about those 13 children often. Marie, who was only 6, Sophie and Emma and Isabel, the 3 boys, Jean, Henri, Thomas, all the others whose names are burned into my memory. They trusted Sister Margaret. We all did. She was supposed to protect us, care for us, keep us safe. Instead, she murdered us. 13 that night, and I believe more before that at other institutions. The photograph taken in September 1905, just 1 month before the murders. I have a copy of it. Looking at that photograph now, Knowing what I know, I can see the evil in Sister Margaret's eyes. She stands on the far right, her face shadowed, her gaze fixed on the camera with an intensity that makes me shudder even now. She was already planning it when that photograph was taken. She had already selected her 13 victims. She was probably looking forward to it, counting down the days. Some of the children in that photograph, Marie, Sophie, the others, were dead within weeks. They stand there in their matching orphanage dresses, unaware they have less than a month to live, unaware that the woman standing behind them is planning to murder them. I survived. 7 of us survived. But we were never really free of that night. We all carry the trauma, the guilt, the memories of watching our friends be murdered while we did nothing. Sister Margaret stole more than 13 lives that night. She stole our innocence, our sense of safety, our ability to trust. She showed us that monsters are real and that they sometimes wear religious habits. I write this now because I'm old, and I want the truth to be remembered. I want people to know what really happened at St. Catherine's Orphanage in October 1905. Sister Margaret was not insane. She was not confused. She was evil. She deliberately chose to become a nun to gain access to vulnerable children she could murder. She killed at least 18 children that we know of, possibly more that were never connected to her. And she used the cover of Religious Vocation to do it. She exploited the trust society places in religious institutions and the invisibility of orphaned children to commit murder after murder. Those 13 children deserved better. They deserved protection, care, love. Instead, they got a murderer who wore a nun's habit and called murder mercy. May their souls rest in peace, and may no one ever forget what Sister Margaret did to them. I spent months researching the case further, locating descendants of the victims, examining records of Sister Margaret's earlier positions, documenting the pattern of suspicious deaths that had followed her throughout her brief career. What emerged was a clear picture of a serial killer who had specifically chosen religious vocation as a means of accessing vulnerable victims. She had targeted the most defenseless children in society, orphans who had no families to advocate for them, whose deaths would not be thoroughly investigated, who could be killed without society taking much notice. I wrote a comprehensive account of the case, examining not just what happened, but what it revealed about institutional failure, the exploitation of religious trust, and how society's indifference to marginalized children enabled a predator to kill repeatedly. The book was titled The Mercy Killer, Sister Margaret and the St. Catherine's Orphanage Murders of 1905. The photograph I'd found appeared on the cover. Looking at it now with full knowledge of what it captured, it became an unbearable image. 3 nuns and 16 children posed in front of an ivy-covered wall in September 1905. The children in their matching dresses, serious and subdued. The nuns in their dark habits, watchful and formal. And on the far right, Sister Margaret. Her face partially shadowed beneath her heavy veil, her eyes fixed intently on the camera, with that quiet but eerie and haunting presence. She was 34 years old when this photograph was taken. She had already killed 5 children at previous institutions. She had already selected the 13 children at St. Catherine's, who would be her next victims. She had already been planning their murders for months. And she stood there for this photograph, knowing what she was going to do, perhaps even relishing it. Some of the children in this photograph, at least 10 of the 13 murdered children, are likely visible in this image, were dead within 6 weeks. They stand there in their orphanage dresses, unaware they have less than 2 months to live. This photograph, taken in September 1905, documented a serial killer posing with her future victims. I received many letters in response to the book. Some focused on the psychiatric aspects. Others discussed institutional reforms needed to protect vulnerable children. But one letter moved me most deeply. It was from the great-granddaughter of Marie Dubois, Sister Margaret's first victim that terrible night. Dear Dr. Morrison, thank you for researching and telling the story of St. Catherine's Orphanage with such care and respect for the victims. Marie Dubois was my great-great-grandmother's younger sister. Marie was 6 years old when Sister Margaret murdered her, the youngest victim, the first one killed that night. Our family has carried this tragedy for 4 generations. The knowledge that our little Marie was strangled in her bed by someone who was supposed to protect her has been a wound that never fully healed. The photograph you feature in your book, showing Marie and the other children standing in front of that ivy-covered wall, with Sister Margaret looming behind them, is almost unbearable to look at now that we understand what it represents. Marie stands there, perhaps in the second row, just a little girl in an orphanage dress. She looks so serious, so vulnerable. And standing behind her is the woman who would murder her 6 weeks later. Thank you for ensuring that Marie and the other 12 children are remembered not just as anonymous victims, but as real children with names and stories. Thank you for exposing Sister Margaret as the predator she was, not a mercy killer, not someone suffering from religious delusion, but a serial murderer who deliberately chose to become a nun to gain access to victims. Sincerely, Sophie Dubois-Laurent. The photograph now hangs in my study, a powerful reminder of how predators can hide behind institutions, how vulnerable populations suffer when society doesn't protect them, and how evil can wear the disguise of piety and dedication. I look at that photograph often. 16 children and 3 nuns posed before an ivy-covered wall on a September day in 1905. It looks like an ordinary orphanage portrait, formal, proper, documenting the children and their caretakers. But it captures something darker. A serial killer standing among her future victims. Children who had already lost their families, now about to lose their lives. A predator who wore a nun's habit and used religious authority to access, isolate, and murder the most vulnerable children in society. The photograph was taken in September 1905. On October 15th, 1905, Sister Margaret entered the North Dormitory at midnight. Over the course of 2.5 hours, she systematically murdered 13 children, while 7 other children lay paralyzed by fear, pretending to sleep. By dawn on October 16th, 13 children were dead. Their bodies were arranged in a circular pattern in a hidden cellar, their hands folded in prayer, their murderer calmly pretending to help search for them. Mais Marie Dubois, Sophie Laurent, Emma Petit, Isabelle Martin, Claire Bernard, Louise Thomas, Marguerite Robert, Antoinette Moreau, Julie Simon, Catherine Dubois, Jean Mercier, Henri Blanc, and Thomas Lefebvre rest in peace. May their memories be honored, and may Sister Margaret be remembered by history as what she truly was. Not a mercy killer, but a predator who exploited religious vocation to murder children. The photograph looked normal, until you learned about midnight on October 15th, 1905, when the children began vanishing one by one, strangled by the nun standing on the far right, the one with the shadowed face and the haunting gaze. A nun who deliberately chose her vocation to gain access to victims. A serial killer who murdered at least 18 children over 13 years. A monster who wore a habit and called murder mercy. That's the terrible truth preserved in this photograph from September 1905. The photograph looked normal, until midnight, when the children began vanishing one by one.